Welcome back to The Explainer. We're jumping right into some incredibly tense, highly unusual events unfolding in the Gulf of Oman. Over just a few days, commercial shipping vessels, specifically those carrying Indian crews, have literally come under direct military fire. We're going to break down the data, the statements, and the shifting geopolitical friction to figure out exactly what's going down in these vital international waters. Let's get right to it.
We have to start with the harsh reality on the water. Listen, this is an intercepted distress call from a commercial oil tanker after a missile strike. Fire on board and vessel is sinking. These are civilian workers caught right in the crossfire of an international military conflict, begging for help as their ship goes up in flames. This isn't just some abstract geopolitical chess game, you know? These are real people facing immediate, terrifying danger on the high seas.
Section 1. Targeting commercial tankers. Let's look at the timeline and trace how the sequence of events just rapidly spiraled over the span of a mere 3 days.
So, according to U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM, their forces actively struck 3 totally distinct commercial vessels off the coast of Oman. It started Monday. The MT Maravex gets hit by a precision munition fired from a U.S. Navy F-18 Super Hornet. Boom. Then, fast forward just 2 days to Wednesday, the MT Setabello is struck by precision munitions. And if that wasn't enough, on Thursday, the MT Jalveer's engine room gets blasted by 2 Hellfire missiles from a U.S. aircraft. That is 3 massive commercial ships, completely disabled, in under a week.
And man, the human stakes here are just absolutely devastating. Now, the crews of the Maravex and the Jalveer were thankfully rescued. Shout out to the Royal Air Force of Oman and some passing ships for stepping in there. But to strike on the MT Setabello, that ended in tragedy. Out of the 24 Indian crew members on board, 3 civilian workers are confirmed dead or missing after that precision munition hit the engine room.
Which brings us to Section 2, the incident, a clash of perspectives. Because look, when a military explicitly fires on civilian infrastructure, the very first question we all have is, why? Let's zoom in on the Setabello.
What we're seeing here is a massive clash of narratives. It's night and day. On one hand, you've got U.S. CENTCOM saying the Setabello was targeted because it was attempting to transport Iranian oil, totally violating a U.S. blockade. They claim the crew just ignored their directions. But then, on the flip side, the ship's manager, IOS Marine FZ, categorically denies any link whatsoever to Iran or its oil. Actually, they take it a step further. They're asserting that absolutely no contact or warnings were ever made by U.S. forces before those munitions were fired. It's wild. 2 completely opposing perspectives over a lethal strike.
And you know, the confusion out there is just compounding the danger. Take the MT Maravex, the one hit by the F-18. We're seeing this really disturbing trend right now. According to the Forward Seamen's Union of India, commercial crews are operating in sheer panic. Basically, to avoid being targeted by anyone, including Iranian forces, these ships are turning off their AIS tracking systems. They're going completely dark, trying to hide in what's effectively become an active war zone. But here's the catch. By going dark, communication totally breaks down, and the risk of a catastrophic miscalculation, it just skyrockets.
All right, moving on to Section 3, the U.S. blockade explained. Because to really grasp the friction here, we've got to look at the macro-level strategy from April 13th that's driving all this.
So, checking the numbers released directly by CENTCOM, they've successfully redirected 135 compliant ships since this blockade kicked off in mid-April. 135! That tells us there is a massive, highly active enforcement operation happening right now across the Gulf of Oman and the Strait of Hormuz. They're seriously trying to choke off the Iranian oil trade.
But here is the kicker, the number you really need to pay attention to. They have actively fired upon and disabled 9 non-compliant vessels since this blockade began. That includes the 3 Indian crude tankers we're looking at today. The U.S. military is making it crystal clear they will use kinetic force, we're talking Hellfire missiles and precision munitions, to physically stop merchant ships they believe are crossing the line.
And the scale of the human risk involved in all this, it's just staggering. Right now, there are over 20,000 Indian seafarers trapped navigating this exact conflict zone. 20,000! India provides one of the absolute largest maritime workforces on the planet, which means their citizens are disproportionately stuck on the front lines of a geopolitical standoff that they literally have nothing to do with.
This brings us to a quote from the Forward Seamen's Union of India that just perfectly grounds the whole situation. They said, "Seafarers are workers. They are not soldiers." Wow. They're pleading with the international community not to sit quietly while civilians are forced to dodge missiles just to deliver the world's cargo. It's a pretty sobering reminder that international trade rests entirely on the shoulders of vulnerable human labor.
Section 4.
India's diplomatic protest. So, zooming out for a second, how exactly does a nation respond when its citizens are targeted by a friendly superpower in international waters? Let's look at India's playbook.
India has adopted a super firm, diplomatically neutral, but extremely protective stance. They actually summoned a top U.S. diplomat, Jason Meeks, right to the Ministry of External Affairs in New Delhi to lodge a formal protest. And they didn't hold back. They demanded an immediate stop to the targeting of civilian infrastructure and commercial ships. Plus, they laid out the broader strategic picture. There are 10 million Indian citizens living and working across the wider Gulf region. 10 million. Keeping them safe is priority number one for India.
The Indian Ministry of External Affairs put out a formal statement calling these attacks deeply worrisome. They are basically putting Washington on notice that the safety of India's massive global workforce absolutely cannot be treated as collateral damage. Now, the U.S. State Department did respond, saying they're in direct contact with the Indian government about this, but the core tension out there on the water, it's still very much unresolved.
So we're going to leave you with this final critical thought to chew on. When civilian merchant ships somehow become legitimate military targets, and everyday seafarers find themselves in the crosshairs of F-18s and Hellfire missiles, we're seeing a massive, fundamental shift in the safety of international waters. Honestly, how fragile is the global economy when the actual infrastructure of international trade is literally under fire? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope this deep dive helped you untangle the sheer complexities of what's happening in the Gulf right now. Catch you next time.